Good morning. I'm Nick Ralston from University of North Dakota. I'll be talking today about the toxic effects of mercury and other electrophiles on brain selenoenzymes. Selenium is required by an elite group of enzymes with unique functions, and plants start off the process by taking either a sulfur or a selenium to create either a methionine or a selenomethionine. When selenomethionine is degraded, however, all of a sudden that selenium is handled quite differently. It becomes incorporated into a selenocysteine. The inorganic selenium is the required material for making a new selenocysteine since you cannot reuse them. And the selenocysteine, as the 21st genetically encoded amino acid, is incorporated into 25 specific proteins by humans. And these are replicated in all vertebrates, nearly equal numbers, and certainly near equal functions and patterns of tissue distribution. Now, since the brain and endocrine tissues require selenium, they're preferentially supplied with it. However, during a even long-term selenium deficiency, the brain and endocrine organs continue getting selenium, just remobilized from other tissue stores. Now, during a really, really long-term severe selenium deficiency, you can have diminished immune responses and even myocardial damage, such as patients that are on long-term parenteral nutrition. But otherwise, selenium deficiency is really almost impossible to detect because you can have near zero levels in most of your tissues and still have near normal levels in your brain. However, one thing can impair your selenoenzyme activities, and that's the topic of our discussion today. Now let's look at the proteins or the amino acids that incorporate either a sulfur or a selenium. Methionine and selenomethionine are handled through all of plant life and all of animal life as if they were equivalent. There's no noticeable difference in how they are processed, other than that selenomethionine, when it breaks down, will release an inorganic selenium and enable a selenocysteine to be made. Cysteine and selenocysteine are very similar, but you'll notice that cysteine is protonated, so it isn't showing a real charge. It's not as nucleophilic as selenocysteine. Selenocysteine is generally charged, ionized, and it is very nucleophilic, the most potent nucleophile in the body. Now, in the various tissues, as I mentioned, brain has a very distinct need for selenium. And you can see here, selenoprotein W, the mRNA, has very high levels of expression in a single cell layer, similar high levels of expression in the hippocampus. And you can see throughout the brain, the cerebellum, there's a cerebrum, there's a very high level of selenoprotein W expression throughout the brain. Others are low. Some tissues have no selenoprotein expression or selenoprotein W. And looking at selenoprotein M, just one of the other 25, you can see there's a very different distribution. Single cell layer still has it, but so do additional cell layers and tissues. Hippocampus, once again, still has it. Tissues are a slightly different pattern of selenoprotein M expression. And this is true of virtually all of the selenoproteins. Mercury is famously dangerous. Now, you're probably familiar with Mercury as the FTD florist statue. Mercury was famous for speed. And of course, florists, they want their flowers to be delivered just like all merchants with the greatest of speed. And because Mercury was the god of speed, he was also famous as the god of thieves. And since Mercury, the toxic element, can steal the selenium that we need to protect our brains from harm, Mercury is a thief. It's a bad one. And when mercury steals from the selenium rich, well, there's no harm done because if mercury takes a few seleniums, you still have many, many more left. So no problem. But when mercury steals from the selenium poor, they're left with nothing, not even their lives. Now, here is a rat study, one of the first ones we did, and we fed low, normal, or rich levels of selenium. And you can see there was really no difference in how these animals grew. They were all healthy, they were all fine. However, when we fed these animals these levels of selenium plus mercury, a toxic level of mercury, 50 micromolar, about equal to 10 ppm of methyl mercury. There were either no toxic effects if it was a selenium rich diet, slight toxic effects if it was normal, or if it was a low selenium diet, that level of mercury was lethal. But you notice that the amount of mercury was equal. It was just the amount of selenium that varied. So it's not how much mercury that is dangerous, it's how much mercury there is in relation to selenium. If you've got even one selenium for every 5 mercuries, you're fine. You can still get the selenium to the brain. 50 to 1, well, it's not quite so easy. 500 to 1, yes, that mercury is going to catch and keep the selenium from getting to the brain, and that will cause toxicity. Now, what happens though is the methyl mercury binds to either the sulfur of like a cysteine, and it forms what I call pseudomethionine. And this is actually the form that 98% of all mercury in fish occurs as. If it binds instead, if a methyl mercury binds to a selenocysteine, it will form a pseudomethionine once again, but this is how it begins. It finds and binds the selenium with about a millionfold higher efficiency than it binds to sulfur. And once it forms this molecule, the mercury and selenium never let go of each other. This will end up as a mercury selenide, which is insoluble and will remain in the lysosomes of the cells for long periods of time. Now, in fish, when we're looking at the studies where there were harmful effects seen, there was always a excess of mercury relative to selenium. Pilot whale meat in the Faroes, we base our warnings on whether or not it's safe to eat fish on a study where 85% of the mercury exposure came from eating whale meats. That's highly inappropriate. You can see that of all of these various types of commonly consumed fish of various tuna, salmon, etc., even most sharks, other than some of the big ones, you can see there's usually more selenium than mercury. So this will actually protect rather than cause mercury toxicity. But how are we going to communicate this to the public easily? Telling them, well, there's this many moles of that and that many moles of mercury, that will not resonate. We had to come up with a better way of doing it, and the US EPA paid us to come up with an equation that would relate this clearly and easily to the public. And that equation was the selenium health benefit value. And here's a copy of the equation here, but really all it does is it says if it's got more mercury than selenium, it's going to have a negative health benefit value. But if it has more selenium than mercury, you'll be protected against mercury toxicity because you'll have plenty of selenium to make up for whatever mercury finds and binds. So it will be beneficial, protective against mercury toxicity. So that's the important take-home point of the health benefit value. And you can see it's very easy to pick out which ones are safe and which ones should not be consumed during pregnancy. In the Faroe Islands study, the umbilical cord bloods of the children were measured, and mercury across this axis, selenium across this axis. You can see that the mercury, as it increased, they came closer and closer to equimolar amounts of mercury and selenium. However, in the Hawaiian Islands study, the children there, their moms were only eating ocean fish, which are rich in selenium, and they did not approach the 1-to-1 molar line. In fact, in the Faroe study, for every increase in mercury, the selenium only went up less than half a unit. Whereas in Hawaii, for every increase in mercury, the selenium increased ninefold. So almost 10 times faster rising selenium than mercury. So in summary, the early concerns regarding seafood mercury exposures, they were based on mistaken assumptions and way oversimplistic interpretations. And while smaller and less appropriate studies, such as in the Faroes, did report harm, the studies that are of people that are only eating ocean fish or eating ocean fish, that's their seafood that they're exposed by, those are far better, far bigger, and they're finding that the more ocean fish women eat, the better their child's IQ, on average by 7.7 IQ points, plus their scholastic and social abilities improved. And the selenium health benefit value, which is characteristic, which is positive in virtually all forms of ocean fish, predict they should improve health. We see they do improve health. So it's very important to make this point to all of the government agencies that wish to protect health. They need to base it on health benefit values. And mercury toxicity, just in closing, it's changed from being one of the most mysterious to being one of the best understood of all toxic agents. And I want to thank my coworkers at the US EPA and for their funding and support of developing the selenium health benefit value, and also from NOAA. Thank you very much for listening, and I appreciate everything that we had a chance to share today.